Are you a footballer who wants to maximize your performance to succeed at the top level? My new ebook, Strength and Conditioning 101 for Female Footballers, is now available. For free and instant access, simply head on over to jacobandre.com. Link is in the show notes.
G'day and welcome to the Women's Footy Podcast. Today I'm talking to Geordie from the Adelaide Crows. Geordie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, mate. Good to catch up and chat. I didn't mention this earlier just before we started recording, but when you did pop up on my phone, the thing by association, the thing I think of when I see your name pop up these days is Jazzy Hewitt's mark and goal in the 22 grand final to kick us off. So, we've got a bit of a link with yourself and the Crows footy program and some of our players and some of our girls going back quite a long way. So it's good to sit down and chat.
Yeah, very grateful that I got to spend 3 seasons as sort of, I suppose you'd call it a subcontractor, being employed by Phil Harper, who is possibly your boss. Yes, no?
Yes.
So, and I mentioned his name because he has been on the podcast and he's had a big chat and talked about his time at Adelaide as the football operations manager and many other roles. I'm just going to deviate here for a second and plug his episode because it was really interesting. And one of the best things that he spoke about, in my opinion, was when the AFLW competition was coming into effect, they were speaking to clubs, and when they were talking to Adelaide, they spoke to Phil and they said, we kind of expect you to be the second worst team in the competition. And so he said, oh, okay, cool, no worries. Well, who's the worst then? And they said, GWS. And he said, all right, well, my only one requirement is that you play us against GWS in round 1. And the rest is history. I'll let you go and listen to that episode. But of course, Adelaide won the premiership that year. And in fact, won that first game against GWS, which had the desired effect of Phil, which was to build some momentum in the town of Adelaide.
Yeah, I was there that day, and that was out at Seven Oval, and it was packed to the brim. And it was the first day of AFLW here in Adelaide, and it was a fantastic day. And it's honestly hard to believe that was 8 or so years ago. It's come so far since then. But yeah, he's a very good operator, Phil. I'm sure that's a really good chat. Plenty that can be learned from him. He just became a life member of the footy club very recently, just a couple of weeks ago. Very well deserved.
Yeah, he's obviously been a big part, and so have you, in the success of Adelaide and building the culture. We'll get into talking about culture. But at one point, I'm pretty confident in this statement that Adelaide had won 3 premierships out of 6 seasons. So 50%. I think in their 3rd premiership, that was a 6th season, and there's been 2 seasons since then. So we're now we've finished 8 seasons. So the most successful women's football team in the history of AFLW thus far.
So far, yeah. It's been a good start.
On that. So before I do start to ask some questions that I've prepped you with, what's it been like just in general? Like just even a statement like that, how does that make you feel?
It makes you realise that success, if you were to look across the playing group from that first premiership to what we have now, there might only be 3 or 4 players that are the same. Success isn't built upon the talent of the players on your list or, anybody that's sort of in the jumper or in the building at any one moment in time. It carries on over a longer period of time because of the standards and the behaviours and the cultures that are set early on. And people like Phil and people like Chelsea Randall, who up until the season's been the captain of the footy club for those first 8 years, and the culture setters and the people that provide the support and the platform and the scaffold for the team to evolve and to grow year on year are the reason that you end up with sustained success over a long period of time. So I've certainly learned an incredible amount being around such a good team and so many leaders at different levels on the field, administration, coaching, high performance. So it's been fun. It's been it's just been exciting, and it's been a really good learning experience. It's been excellent. It's been a really cool 8 years.
Yeah, you sort of brought up and alluded to just the team in the first season compared to the 8th season. One of the things that Phil said was that, and no disrespect to that team in the first season because they're a cracking team, obviously, but if the team that won the 3rd premiership in the 6th season played against the team that won in the first season, the team that won the 3rd premiership would beat that team from the first season by 17 goals. He said that's how far women's football has come. What's your experience been like with that?
It's been amazing to see the development. The first team was really fun to work with because it was this strange mix of girls who'd played park footy for 10, 15, 20 years and had never had the opportunity to be elite or professional with it. So, we think of Courtney Cravey, who was an All-Australian at the time, one of our leaders, and a premiership player in that first season. She'd just been playing at Morphettville Park in the Sorful for years and years, probably without any real hope that there would be a national level competition while she was playing. And you end up with players like her playing alongside people like Jenna McCormick and Erin Phillips, who are Olympic basketballers or professional soccer players. And it was this really strange mix of elite athletes from different codes and park footballers who'd just grown up playing footy at whatever level they could. And they all sort of mashed together to create this really, obviously very brand new elite competition. And it was interesting at that point in time. But yeah, the development of the competition and the pathways and the players coming through just has gone so quickly, quicker than I think most of us probably would have imagined at the time. And the talent of the girls that you bring into the club when you draft now, they're just natural footballers. So you're now seeing, how good these girls can be when you give them the support networks and the pathways as juniors coming through, and they don't have to go off and play different sports, and they don't have to, sort of plug away on their own. They're given support and pathways, and then they enter our system when we pick them up at 18 years old these days, and they're just go. Their skill level and their talent is evident and improving all the time.
So you share examples and stories there. You mentioned sort of the player's journey into it and coming from different sports and backgrounds. Can you share your journey coming into becoming involved with Australian rules football?
Yeah, I came, in terms of just being involved with footy, I came into it late, I reckon, compared to most South Australian kids anyway. I grew up playing a lot of basketball. That was my journey growing up. And anybody that's been involved in elite basketball pathways know they don't leave much room for participation in anything else. So from 13 to 17 or 18, I was training 7 days a week and playing games for basketball. But I'm about 5'7", and I realised there probably wasn't going to be a pro career on the end of it. So I had a few good mates playing footy at Flagstaff Hill as I was sort of nearing the end of my junior sporting days. And I went out and had a go at that and left basketball behind for a year or two, and I absolutely fell in love with it. The sport itself and how important and essential the team is, which basketball is a team game, but there is a substantially greater individual element to it. And I just loved the team component of footy, but also the community element of it, like the fact that you'd hang around for dinner after training or for the whole afternoon, watch the A-grade days and that kind of stuff. That was just really novel and new coming from different sports. So fell in love with it that way. Managed to have a little bit of a peek into some more elite pathways at the West Adelaide Footy Club through their under 18s program. Wasn't good enough to pursue it or to take it much further than that, but that gave me a bit of a taste for what footy looks like at the next level, and with like a slightly greater element of professionalism. And I just thought it was awesome. So I came to it a bit late, but I fell in love with it really quickly.
And like I imagine with lots of strength and conditioning coaches, you have played a lot of sport, but what inspired you to become a strength and conditioning coach?
Well, yeah, so as I mentioned with the basketball stuff and being short of stature, I had to prepare and train quite hard in order to try and make up as much of that gap as I could. And I enjoyed that part of it. And through the SASI pathways through Basketball SA here in Adelaide, you'd get exposure to the gym and a strength and conditioning coach from about the age of 15 or so. And I enjoyed that part of training. Thought that was like a lot of fun, and I could see it improving my game and bridging the gap between myself and some of the other kids who might have been more athletic than me. But as I got older, I actually started my first internship at the Adelaide Crows within football analysis. So more about data and vision and statistics and packaging that up for coaches and players. And I quite enjoyed that too. In the end, it probably wasn't social enough. It's a lot of time spent just staring at computer screen, right? Stats and vision. But I quite enjoyed that too. So what I think I've learned about myself over the last 8 or 9 years in space is that what I really enjoy is working in a team, and particularly a sports team, and helping to contribute to that environment. It's not like anything else you get in any other workplace anywhere in the world. You're part of a competition of 18 teams, and only one of you really gets to point to success at the end of the season and everybody else goes back to the drawing board, and you've got ups and downs every weekend along the way, and you're competing, and it's just a really fun environment to contribute to. And the tools that I contribute with at the moment are strength and conditioning, that physical preparation space, which I'm passionate about, and then transferring that into this sort of elite sport environment. So it was a combination of factors that got me involved in this industry and in this role.
So you came in on an internship to do data analysis, and you're now head strength and conditioning coach with the women's team, and you're also working with the men's. Bridge that gap in the journey for me in what you've done with Adelaide from when you started to where you are now.
Absolutely. I'm pretty fortunate. I'll start with that. This is a hard space to get involved in, and it can be really difficult to get a break. And I was really lucky that I was in the right place at the right time very early on in my career. And then once you find yourself in that situation, you've just got to dig your heels in and do everything you can and make every post a winner. So I was in my second year of my undergraduate degree when Jared Wallace, who's our sports science coordinator, runs our rehab program for our AFL men's program these days here at the Crows, came out to Flagstaff Hill where my mates were playing amateur footy. And I was just training over the summer with the B grade at that point in time. And when he came out, and I knew who Jared was from some stuff that he'd done at the university, I just approached him and said, mate, I'm more interested in what you do than, what I'm doing out here, just training to play B grade. So can I just hang out with you and, help you throw some cones out and chew the fat? And that led to him putting my, sort of resume in for an internship that the club was looking for at the time in that data analysis space. But when I talk about being in the right place at the right time, this was a year where the usually really strong relationship between the Crows and UniSA had kind of broken down a bit. So there was no interns anywhere within the footy department. So I started in data analysis or football analysis, but all of a sudden the strength and conditioning guys needed a bit of a hand on the gym floor too. So I put my hand up to do that. Our sample program had started maybe 2 or 3 years earlier. They'd joined the sample competition and they needed a strength and conditioning coach to look after their development players. So I put my hand up to do that. The AFLW side was being scouted for and it was in the works to commence the following year. So I put my hand up to assist with that and to head out and film local games so that Phil and the rest of the crew at the time could scout for our initial list. And over the course of that first intern year, it turned into about 4 or 5 part-time roles on top of the initial internship, which then meant in my third year at UniSA, or in my final year of my undergraduate degree, I was sort of employed in a part-time capacity across a few different areas of the footy club. And just before I graduated, so before I finished my undergrad degree, I started my first full-time role as an assistant to the high performance department in the AFL program here, while also assisting Brad Newton, who was the initial AFLW high performance manager at the club as well. So over the course of that first couple of years, I basically just put my hand up and said yes to every opportunity that presented, whether it was filming local women's footy games or coaching the sample side in the gym. And that led to a full-time role. And then I was the assistant strength and conditioning coach and later a senior strength and conditioning coach for the AFL side for about 4 or 5 years. Then things hit a bit of a snag through COVID. So obviously there was mass layoffs across the industry at that point in time. I actually had to go and spend 2 seasons working in the sample and doing a few other jobs at the South Australian Sports Institute and St. Peter's College and doing a few bits and pieces around there. But I maintained a really good relationship with everybody here at the footy club. It was just the time we were in. And when that period was over and things were starting to open back up again, the club was looking for somebody to come back in and take over the AFLW role as high performance manager in sort of more of a designated full-time nature. Previously, it had been run by flow over staff from the AFL program. But when I came back at the start of 2022 or late in 2021, we had it as its own designated standalone role for the first time. So that's involved a bit of crossover and a bit of stuff with the men's program for the last couple of years as well. But primarily it is an AFLW role these days, which has been, like a really good evolution for the program and excellent. Love it.
So it sounds like for anyone that's aspiring to become a high performance strength and conditioning coach is to be in the right place at the right time, and then to put your hand up continuously, and then to build and maintain relationships. So,
absolutely.
and I think like even building and maintaining relationships is how you put yourself into the right place at the right time to begin with, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there comes a time where you're juggling so many things that eventually you have to start saying no to a few things in order to do what you're doing as well as you possibly can. But in those early days, just say yes to every opportunity you get. You just never know what it's going to do, and what doors it might open. That certainly was the case for me, and something really sort of grateful that the more things I said yes to, the more doors that opened, and it's led to what has been a really fun and enjoyable career at the Adelaide Footy Club.
Yeah, awesome. So you've had experience with men's and women's. What are some of the unique challenges that you see female athletes face in terms of strength and conditioning compared to their male counterparts?
The biggest thing in the last 7 or 8 years, unfortunately, this one is changing slowly. It's a big wheel and it's turning really slowly. But the biggest thing has been the lack of access and opportunity. When I go back to those first few years of our AFLW program here at the Crows, it ran for I'll guess and say about a 10-week preseason and then a 10-week in-season period. And that was the only portion of the year that the girls were sort of contracted for and had access to staffed hours in the gym and coached sessions. And even in that period of time, if I contrast it to the AFL program at the time, we probably had the men in the gym for 8 to 9 hours per week per individual, whereas the girls might have had an hour and a half to 2 hours across the week to fit their gym work in. And so you'd be looking for what parts of the program are the most important, what can we get done, what do we need to keep in, and you'd be trying to squeeze it in when you finish training on the field at 7:30 p.m, 8 p.m, after a couple of on-field sessions a week, with 30 girls in the gym at once, as opposed to 10 or 15 to 2 or 3 coaches at a time on the AFL side. So for the last 7 or 8 years, the biggest challenge that they've faced has been access and opportunity when it comes to athletic development. But fortunately, with a number of the changes over the last few years, the amount the AFL is investing into the space, not only is our program getting better, we've got substantially more contact hours with the girls. They're contracted year round. We have more staff and more resources available to them. But even at the lower levels, even at the sample W level, it just keeps developing, getting better, and the girls have access to coaching and to resources, to everything that they need to become better athletes, sort of all the way down through the pathways these days. So to this point, I would say that's been the biggest challenge, but that's been changing for the better, which is really good.
Yeah. So what would you say, with limited time and resources, especially early on, what would the priorities be? And even for a female footballer who's not playing AFLW, who's like a developing football player, like just say a teenager, maybe like look at it from that point of view, what would the priorities be?
We just looked at foundational movement patterns and improving strength in those, sort of key foundational movements. Obviously there's elements of injury prevention and tissue-specific and joint-specific work that you can get into when you've got more time and more access, more hours with your athletes. But in those initial days, we were just sort of deciding upon the most important and most impactful handful of exercises and educating the girls on how to execute them correctly, getting them strong through those patterns, and then progressing those. And not only did that improve, just global strength and foundational strength, which is really important, but it also set a really good foundation for the program, for the players that were involved for a number of years to kind of grow from at the start. So if you're looking to get started, if you are at a development level with your footy, or if you're sort of making your way up through the pathways, try and find a coach or try and do what you can to learn the foundational patterns associated with strength and conditioning and weight training in the gym. Execute those, become competent with those patterns, and then begin to improve your strength and increase your loading and intensity from there. And that'll set you up with really, really good foundation that translates to anything in the program in the future.
Yeah. What would be an example of some of those foundational patterns?
Squatting, deadlifting, hinging, moving sagittally, moving through your lateral lunge progressions, those sorts of things. Pushing and pulling from an upper body standpoint, and then using your trunk both from a bracing and isometric standpoint, but also moving it through a range and being able to flex laterally and control your core. So essentially, your main movement patterns that you'll hear any strength and conditioning coach talk about: squat, deadlift, hinge, lunge. Be able to control push and pull a little bit.
Yeah. So what are some of the common misconceptions about strength and conditioning for female athletes, and how do you address them?
One of the biggest misconceptions, and something that I've still never quite been able to wrap my head around, is how differently people view it to strength and conditioning for our men or for AFL athletes. You know, when we design a program for our men, we're preparing them to go out onto the field and play a 360-degree game. They sprint, change direction, stop and start, absorb contact, collision, tackle, all that kind of stuff. And when we prepare our women to play footy, we're preparing them for a game that is 360 degrees, sprint, change direction, stop and start, deliver contact, collisions and tackling. It's all the same. They've got 2 arms and 2 legs. There's clearly some differences in terms of the more common trends with injuries and things like that. But if you break it down to its most fundamental level, you're just preparing them to play the same game, pretty much the same way that you do with the men. And then you just meet them, you know, where they're at. So if they're at a different stage of development to an AFL player that's been in the league for 10 years, no different than when you get a draftee coming on the men's side. You take those same concepts and those same foundational rocks and you just apply them to the level that the athlete is currently at. We meet them there and start from there. So probably one of the biggest misconceptions is just that the programs need to be drastically different for men to women. They don't. You're preparing them for the same sport and everybody's got 2 arms and 2 legs and you just start from there.
I'm going to go off track a little bit here, but how many different sort of groups would you have? You just mentioned, you know, comparing male and female training and it being essentially the same thing because it's preparing for the same game. And then you brought in there the development group. So how many groups would you have, like a development group, through to a player who's been playing for 10 plus years?
Yep. On the men's and the women's side, we'd typically generally have about 3 different divisions of the group. And then within there, you'd obviously have individualization for whatever any particular athlete needs sort of on top of or adjacent to that program. So typically you'll have a development group who are new to the gym. Generally, this is your first years, might even be some of your first, second, third years, depending on how, you know, sort of quickly they progress. But this is your real foundational group. So this is learning to train, learning the movement patterns, generally improving global strength. Typically, this sort of a group doesn't need dramatic variation in the way that they train. They just need the basics and the foundation again and again. And that'll be enough stimulus for them to improve from a coordination movement patterning standpoint, but also speed and power standpoint. Then you'll generally move on up to what most programs, I'd assume, would sort of term like a strength and hypertrophy group, where you've got the foundations down. Now maybe you're concentrating a little bit more on reaching the sort of anthropometric and body composition targets that you would be chasing as a developing athlete, and also improving your maximal strength output and becoming as strong as you need to be and as you can be. And then the last level would be your strength and power group, or your power and rate of force development group, where there's your seasoned athletes who've trained for a long time. They have a solid training age. They're about as strong as you would need them to be to play the game at the level and the position that they're playing. And at this point, you're looking after their longevity and their power and rate of force development, their ability to express that strength on the field.
Yeah, and how long typically would a player in those first 2 divisions, as you referred to it as, spend? How many years do you think they would spend in each of those sort of divisions?
As a really, really like sort of basic breakdown, it'd probably be 1 to 2 years in your development group before you can move on and start to concentrate a little bit more on hypertrophy and max strength development. And then typically you won't see guys need to transition out of that strength and hypertrophy group until at least their sort of 5th or 6th year in the system, when they've really maxed out and reached what you determined to be their requisite outputs from a max strength standpoint, from a body composition standpoint. They've reached their target playing weight and that's stable for them now, and they can sort of maintain at that level year round. And then probably from year 5 or 6 onwards, for a number of guys. For some guys, it takes longer. For some guys, they'll be in that zone for 7, 8, potentially more years. But as a general rule, I'd say by year 5 or 6, most guys should be about as strong as you'd be expecting them to be. And then they can start to transition over into that strength and power, that power and rate of force development work.
Hey, Jacob here with a quick message. If you're enjoying this episode of the Women's Footy Podcast and you want more fitness tips for the female footballer, I encourage you to join our Instagram channel, Footy Fit Fam. Link is in the show notes. Now, back to the show. Obviously, football can be a really mental game, and even just, being in the system for that long, 7+ years, it can be a little bit mundane. So obviously a lot has to go into mental resilience and that mindset type of training. In your experience, what role does that play in, obviously at your level, you've probably got like sports psychology, or you do have sports psychologists and stuff, but what sort of stuff would you do in regards to building mental resilience and mindset positivity?
Yeah, so the resilience and the mental sort of robustness that we see come through in our space, within the physical performance space, I like the term grit. When I think of the girls that display the greatest mental resilience, mental toughness from a physical preparation standpoint, it's generally the ones that are prepared to do whatever it takes, as difficult or as hard as that may be, but probably more frequently as mundane, repetitive, and boring as it may be. They come in and they brush their teeth, morning and night. They do what needs to be done when it needs to be done without complaint, again and again, away from the view of anybody. Might be things that they have to do at home, that they have to come in early and do, that they have to stay late and do. And that's its own type of mental resilience and mental toughness. It's different to if they're lining up for goal after the siren. That's probably the space that our sports psychs work in, and they obviously do more than that as well. But that's kind of the mental space that we don't touch on so much. But what we do experience and what we can foster growth in is that grit and that determination to get the best out of yourself physically and as an athlete by doing what needs to be done again and again and again, regardless of whether it's being noticed or whether you can see the results tangibly, because eventually you will notice them. They add up, they compound, and they exponentially give you returns over time. But each individual time you do those things, and it might be something as simple as executing your recovery, or coming and preparing and spending that extra 15, 20 minutes getting ready to train before each session so that you can execute the session at a higher level than you would have if you just sort of rolled out of bed and were still rubbing your eyes when you start the first drill. Those little things start to add up over time. And like I said, grit is sort of the term that comes to mind when I think of that. And what we can do, it's very hard to implant that into someone. So I think if you take a team down to the beach and you run through soft sand and you do sand dunes for an hour and you give them the toughest session you possibly think of, everybody kind of looks around and goes, oh, that was tough. How tough are we when a session like that's done? But 6 months later, if one of those players has to decide whether they're going to call an Uber for themselves after a couple of drinks on a night out for dinner, or head out and get plastered and then turn up for training, or compromise their training for the next 3 or 4 days as a result of that, the beach session isn't, that's not going to do anything for you in those moments. But if you can create a program that celebrates those small decisions and that consistent sort of application and commitment to doing the right things again and again and again, that's the kind of mental resilience that we can try and foster and celebrate. We can put our time and attention into in the physical performance space.
That you've just hit on something that's just blown my mind, because I think everything really comes down to that. I think like that's almost so foundational to success. You can almost forget about skills and strength and conditioning. It's like getting those decision makings that you make the right decision, as many times as possible. How do you do that? Do you do any positive reinforcement around that?
Yeah, I think you just make those the behaviours that you celebrate. It can be easy to celebrate the players you have that are the most talented, or to ring a bell when somebody squats the heaviest weight in the gym, stuff like that. And that's all really good. And you want girls who are talented. You want people who get strong in the gym. But if you're going to celebrate players that are improving on their small habits, that are improving the way that they present to training session on session, or celebrate the people that are consistent with their application and commitment week in and week out, and make that the thing that you sort of put up on a pedestal, for lack of a better phrase, and frame as being the ideal athlete within your program. And if you consistently promote those things and build those people up. Hopefully as girls come through your program, girls or guys, wherever you are, they start to see that as the thing that you admire and as the thing that you sort of want to aspire to be like. And hopefully that just fosters, like an environment and a culture, is an overused term, that just keeps that being the accepted behaviour and the things that players want to be a part of and want to do, want to sort of replicate.
I'm looking forward to asking you about culture later in the interview, but so feel free. It's not going to be overused. It's going to be well overused, hopefully. But football is one of the most dynamic sports on the planet. If you really think about it, they need to be strong. You need all the stuff that you need in the gym, strength, hypertrophy, power. You need all the conditioning, speed endurance, acceleration, deceleration, top end speed, change of direction, all this stuff. And then you've got the skills coaches coming in, and you've got all the different skills of hand passing, kicking, marking, and then you've got the sports psychologists with all the mindset stuff as well. There's so many competing demands. How do you balance those demands?
Yeah, I mean, it can be difficult if you want it to be difficult, because there's 1,000 different things that can contribute to your program, and you could draw a link to improve performance from a million different directions. But I think you want to make it really simple. One of the things that we talk about a lot from a physical performance standpoint within our program here is that we want to be purposeful with everything that we do. And if you're going to be purposeful with the actions and the choices that you take, you need to know where you're headed, like what is at the foundation or at the core of what you're trying to do, what's the most important thing. And for us, it's to create good footballers and to execute a really good footy program. So whenever I'm framing up the things that make up our physical performance program, footy has to be at the core of that. So if I've got football coaches telling me that they want more time to talk about or to work on skill fundamentals and match simulation, IQ, or situational awareness and that kind of stuff, whether that's on the field or in education or whatever, I have to be aware that that's at the core of what we do. That's the most important part of a football program, is the football, which sounds obvious. But when you've got all these different competing demands, you get sucked into thinking everything's really important, when that's the most important thing. And then once you've got that as your foundation, you can start to build out and say, okay, well, what supports that as best as we can possibly support that? So if we want to train really well as a footy team, if we want to execute the best possible footy training, we'd better get fit, and we'd better improve our ability to sustain that level of training and increase the intensity and the duration for which we can sustain that level of training. So that's when you start to build out your conditioning program. Or if we want to have athletes who are capable of doing the things within our footy training, within our footy programs we want them to be able to do, then we better improve their overall athletic profile, improve their speed, their power, their strength, so that they can execute these things on the field. I think you just simplify it. You work out what's the most important thing to your program, what matters the most, and build out from there. And just make sure that everything else that you're doing is directly supplementing and assisting with that foundational element. And then you can't really go wrong if you're keeping that in mind.
Yeah, and obviously nutrition is a major part of performance enhancement. And I understand you're not a dietitian, so I'm not going to ask you to provide any specific advice here, but what sort of considerations would you have for nutrition for any of the players that are coming to you and asking any questions? I'm sure you probably get lots of questions about supplements.
Yeah, no. Well, the biggest one that I would start with, and this, you still get this, at every level of footy. Certainly, at the AFL level, we still get this all the time. And I hope our dietitian Georgia Bevan, who does an excellent job with our AFL guys and with our girls, would be happy with me saying this. But you want to fuel for you're an athlete, and if you want to enhance your performance and use nutrition as a tool to improve your performance, you need to fuel yourself adequately. The biggest problem I come across currently working with the women's program and with our draftees on the men's side is just people not eating enough, being too concerned about skin folds and staying light and all these sorts of things, and not allowing them, and not fueling themselves well enough to perform a training, performing games, and over the long term develop into the athlete you see yourself being, and taking a long term view of what's your ideal body composition, or what sort of athlete you want to be, how strong and powerful and physically dominant you want to be, and then taking a long-term view of that and understanding you actually need to fuel yourself over the long term well enough to develop into that. So fuel for performance, make sure you keep that at the front of mind, use nutrition as a tool to improve your on-field outputs and your long-term outcomes, rather than thinking it's something you have to restrict and be concerned about because it's going to influence your skin box or something.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't think I've heard a better answer from a strength and conditioning coach about nutrition ever. So
oh, that's good. I just got to take some of my own advice at some stage.
So you mentioned skin folds, and that's one of the like a measure that athletes partake in. What are some of the other key performance indicators that you track to assess the progress and readiness of female footballers? But probably more back on track here now with the strength and conditioning.
Yeah. So firstly, we don't use skin folds anymore at the Crows. We use DEXA scan, and I think the really positive sort of outcome that you can get from those is you can get a reading on lean body mass or muscle mass from each of your athletes, and that's all we really concentrate on, particularly on the AFLW side. The lean body mass is really the only outcome we're interested in, how much muscle you carry, developing lean mass as we go. On top of that, when we profile our girls, we look at strength, speed, and power. That's our sort of big three in the gym. So we'll test a few key lifts or 1 or 2 rep max in the gym on the floor. Typically, that'll be some kind of squat, a bench press, and a chin up, something in those sort of like squat, push, pull range. We'll test our resilience through some specific tissues and movements. So we'll profile our girls' hip strength, groin push and pull, hamstring strength through a Nordic, and then a couple of capacity measures through your trunk and your calf and that kind of thing. And then last, from a speed and power standpoint, we'll typically profile 3 different variations of a jump: counter movement jump, squat jump, and a drop jump. All 3 of those we feel give us something slightly different in terms of your overall output and your profile. And then a 20 meter, a 10 and 20 meter sprint test. We feel like that gives us a pretty comprehensive battery from a physical standpoint, in terms of the athlete's athleticism, capacity, areas where they're strong and areas that we want to work on. And then on the field, we'll typically do some form of aerobic capacity test as well to make sure that A, we're trending in the right direction with our overall fitness, and B, we have tools to prescribe conditioning work from.
What would that one? What's an example of that?
Oh, we use a yo-yo at the moment, a yo-yo or a 6-minute time trial are the 2 that we're currently using. But you could easily substitute for a 2K time trial or a 30-15. There's a bunch of different tests that you can use for that. But at the moment, we use a yo-yo IR1 or a 6-minute time trial. Yeah.
And to go back to the speed, just out of curiosity, why 10 and 20 meters?
I think that's the most, okay, 2 reasons. I think that's the most applicable for footy. Generally, if you're talking about speed, we get our top speed from our GPS data across time. So when you accumulate GPS data from every training session and every game across the course of the season and multiple years, you get a pretty good idea for what an athlete's top speed is, pretty reliable idea. So we get their top peak velocity when they open up over 50 plus meters pretty reliably from that. But the 0 to 10 or 0 to 20 meter speed probably gives you a really good indicator of who can break with that first 3 or 4 steps the most forcefully, which is that moment from stoppage or when a ball hits the ground, we have to react and get that sort of quick step and that first step that the coaches talk about being so important. So it gives us a read on that. And secondly, we can't set anything longer up with the speed gates in our facility. So I don't think I'd look to measure a 40 or something anyway, but I don't know where I would set it up if we did. So that's a bit of a restriction as well.
I was actually more interested in that question because I teach year 12 PE and it's quite academic. And one of the things that they do is some exercise physiology stuff, they do some biomechanics stuff. And in one of the other year 12 PE classes that I teach, they actually do fitness. And so they do speed and they can choose different distances. And so we go out to the local Institute of Sport and they have the timing gates. And so they play around with different distances that they can choose. And so, yeah, I was really intrigued with that.
Yeah, I would be more inclined to measure something longer, like a 40 meter sprint with the timing gates, if we didn't have the information that we get from our GPS units regarding top speed. But because we collect fairly reliably anyway, when we profile, and typically we just do it inside on a testing day as a part of our profiling battery, a 10 to 20 or a 0 to 10 and a 0 to 20 gives us everything we need for that really short step, or that really short first 3 to 4 step acceleration profile, which I think is different. And you'll see if you profile your group, your top end speed stuff will be dramatically different from your 0 to 10, 0 to 20 stuff. So if you're building out a profile for your athletes, it's important that you understand where they sit within both of those different sort of frames of speed.
Yeah, yeah. How much do you put into like the high velocity sort of running?
A bit, particularly at this point in time, at this time of year. Our girls are in the off season at the moment, and we put a bit of time into it. One of the reasons I like it is because, so firstly, you're training for speed, and it's important to keep that in as a part of, if you use the vertical integration model, you want to have top end speed sort of program year round. But I think it's the auxiliary benefits that are really important when it comes to training top end speed. You improve your running economy and efficiency. It's a really potent injury prevention dose. If you want to sort of talk about the activation of calves and hamstrings in particular when it comes to top end sprinting, and it conditions those tissues to be ready for repeated doses of high velocity running throughout your training program. So if you want to expose your athletes to, whatever high speed band and threshold you use, if you want to expose your athletes to a large amount of high speed running, one of the best ways to prepare them for that is to stress that top end of max velocity sprinting, so that those slightly lower thresholds where you might accumulate a lot of high speed running volume, they're from a tissue and preparation standpoint, they're ready to do that. So from a repeat speed perspective within your training.
Yeah. How do you approach recovery and rest strategies to optimize performance and minimize the risk for injury?
Recovery's been a hot button topic in our program for a year or two, or a couple of years actually, since I came back to this program. In our environment specifically, we don't have a whole lot of time for recovery. We've just in the last 12 months gone to a model where we have one training day a week where the girls are in the facility from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. and they have a full day, just like the guys, to get here in the morning and do their preparation, have their training meetings, get out on the track, have lunch together, hit the gym, do their craft and education, and then potentially do some recovery, at the end of all of that, depending on the training phase that you might be in. But prior to that, for 7 years, we would be training from 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. every night. And so the only recovery methods that I would basically stress during those periods would be get some high quality food into you and go to bed. And we're fortunate to have contrast bars, saunas, Normatex, access to massage, all these things in this facility and as a part of this program, which are all tremendous auxiliaries and add-ons to the recovery process. But in this environment where you've got so many girls who are working jobs, coming to footy training, getting, absolutely knackering themselves on the field and in the gym, just clean up the big box. Just look after your sleep. Just look after your hydration and your nutrition. And then if you've got time to work on some of the other pieces after that, then they can be a nice add-on. So that's been the first thing. It's not that I've been sort of anti-recovery modalities, but I certainly haven't held anybody back after hours once we finish training in order to complete any of them. I've been pretty eager to push the girls out the door once we finish training. But beyond that, if you've got the time, I think have a play around with recovery modalities that you enjoy and change them up frequently. There's enough research and science these days to show that there's benefits to ice baths after training or after games to reduce inflammation, but there's benefits to them in the morning to wake you up and to stimulate. And they can have some, like metabolic benefits and stuff like that as well. And similar with sauna, that they can improve sleep quality, and some of the hormonal responses you get out of them are really positive and stuff. So just have a play around with different modalities, find what works for you, find what you enjoy, and mix it up from time to time.
Yeah. So can you discuss any innovative training methods that you have implemented, or any technologies that you've implemented with any of the players that you've been working with?
No worries. Yeah, so I'll break the fourth wall or whatever they call it here a little bit. When you sent some questions through to prepare for this interview, I saw that one and I was almost a bit nervous about how I was going to answer it, because truthfully, in the AFLW program, we're not particularly innovative with technologies and techniques that we might use, because we want to vet all the things that we use really hard, and we want to make sure that what we bring to the girls, like I said before about being purposeful, we know is going to work, and we know it has a purpose, and we understand what we're getting ourselves into when we introduce these things. On the AFL side of our program at the moment, where we have vastly, greater numbers of staff and hours and time and all these sorts of things, that's often where we introduce new technologies or different wearables for the athletes and different platforms to assess readiness and wellness or physiological outputs and all those sorts of things. And then typically what we'll do is we'll cherry pick on the AFLW side and say, what's working? What have you guys found great success in? And is there any of that we can transfer and bring over into our AFLW program, obviously with the limitations of time and access and budget and those sorts of things. So we try and innovate by being as efficient with our time as possible and playing around with our schedule to make sure that we're prioritizing the main things as best we can. I think that's how we're innovative. We are pretty cutthroat with what we allow into the program. And we make sure that everything that we bring in has a purpose and that we don't leave a whole lot of time for anything else. And then on the experimental innovation side, like I say, we're really fortunate at the moment. We're doing some fantastic stuff in our AFL program, testing different technologies and wearables and techniques and different pieces. And I'm fortunate that I sit across both programs. So if I see anything over there that's working, that's excellent, that we should sort of have a go at over here, then I'll bring it up.
So what advice would you give to any young female footballers aspiring to get drafted into the AFLW?
That's a great question, because earlier we spoke about the level of talent that's coming through the pathways, and the girls are just getting better and better at the sport. So if you're trying to get drafted, what you need to do is catch the eye of recruiters, and in order to do that, I would say the number one most important thing you can do is execute your skills really well and have really sound football fundamentals. If you're clean with disposal, clean with ground ball pickup, if you've got sharp hands, that if you can take a ball out in front with your hands, you can make up for a lot of other shortcomings, whether that's how tall you are or how fast you are and all those sorts of things. If your skill execution, your fundamentals from a football standpoint are really, really solid, that'll stand out at any level, at junior level or at AFLW level. Cover that off first. Make sure that's your most important area of development. Then from there, I think, interestingly, from a lot of draft combine data, the elements of physical preparation or performance that transfer best the long-term outcomes in terms of careers in the AFL, and I'm sure this will translate to AFLW as well, is speed and change of direction. So once you've got your footy fundamentals and you feel like you're sort of exhausting how well you can develop that, work on strength, speed and power output, and that'll translate to how well you cover the ground, how efficiently you move, and how explosive you are on the field. Find a high quality coach that can help you with those things, and I think that'll translate really well to how you perform on the field, and that'll catch the eye of recruiters or people that you're trying to impress.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've asked this question pretty much to every football related person I've had on this podcast, and that some are strength and conditioning coaches and some are head coaches, and they all say the same thing. And it's number one, skills first, work on your skills. And particularly the head coaches will be the ones that say this, like, just grab a footy and walk around with the footy and just be constantly with the football in your hand. And then the second priority is your fitness and work on your fitness.
Yeah.
You answered it much more specifically with speed and power and that. But
Yep.
Head coaches will always say, just grab a footy and have a footy constantly and then work on your fitness and then everything else after that. But they're the top two priority.
Absolutely. Well, if you come into a program like ours or any like any AFLW program, we'll get you fit. We can get you fit once we get you in the doors. But if you can come in here with highly developed footy skills, that's the real goal. That's what we want.
So we discussed at the beginning culture, and Adelaide has a phenomenal culture. And I said I want to get onto this a little bit later, and we can't talk about this too much, I don't think, because it's truly why I believe Adelaide has become the most successful women's team and club. how do you build that?
That's $1 million question, maybe more than $1
The
million
massive
question.
question.
If you could transplant it, everybody would want to know the secret. So I won't pretend like I know the secret. I've been fortunate to see, like a fantastic program up close, and to get to watch it start and develop and evolve, and to still be involved in it now. It's one of those things that it's hard to define it, but you know it when you see it. I was also really lucky in the 2 years that I was, or the year and a half that I was away from the footy club, to be involved at the Woodville West Torrens football club in a period where we won back-to-back premierships in that competition, the SANFL as well. And the thing that I would say for both of those programs, so the AFLW and the SANFL, so that it's not just specific 21 program or whatever, in both of those environments, we had, like trademarks or whatever you would call your phrase or your words or whatever that you would stick on the walls and refer to regarding your behaviours and that kind of stuff. But in both of those environments, after a very short period of time, you could have taken all the signage down off the walls. You could have even taken, the trademarks or the language or whatever it was away. And because of the standards of the people, from your best player to your last player on the list or your most recent player drafted, from your coach to your fitness staff to your trainers, everybody understood without it needing to be written down, what are the behaviours that are expected of the people in the building and why. Like, why do we value those things? And then you know it when you see it. And then it's easy to replicate. It's easy to, like I said earlier with the mental resilience stuff, it's easy to celebrate. It's easy to point to and say that's what we're trying to be. But it stands out when that's not the behaviour or the standard that's executed or displayed by an individual or a group or something at one time. But ultimately, that comes down to the strength of your leadership. So in a footy perspective, for us, it starts with, like we mentioned before, Phil Harper as the head of footy has just been outstanding in that role. We've had Chelsea Randall and Aaron Phillips as our captains for the initial period of AFLW, and we've had a number of emerging leaders under them who have done an incredible job. Beck Goddard was our coach for the first couple of years. She fostered like a really positive environment within our team and built it up to start. And then, for the last 5 or 6 years since then, it's been Doc Clark, and he's just taken it to another level again. So it comes down to your people and how well they maintain those standards. But it's special. If I can tell you how to develop it, how to grow it, and give you a step-by-step guide, I just don't know what I'd do. It's very rare.
One of the things that I heard Phil talk about a lot was family first.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. We've been that way from the start, and that's primarily come from Phil. Going back to the absolute start, we always said that the most important thing was family. The second thing was your career and everything you had going outside of footy, and footy should just be the fun thing that you get to do on top of all of that. So square those first two things away, and you'll get the best out of yourself as a footballer. And that attitude and that approach has just continued all the way through.
Yeah. So what are some of your most memorable moments and success stories from your time working with Adelaide?
The easy answer is the premiership. But they were all different. So 2017, I was pretty brand new to my role, and I was only assisting Brad Newton to set this program up in its first 2 or 3 years, amazingly well, for success into the future in terms of standards that he set from a standpoint. And that first year, like you said, there was a bit of it was hard for us to get a license in the first place. I wasn't involved in that process, but I've heard the story enough to know that the footy club had to really work hard to get a license. And when they were given one, there was a fair bit of skepticism about how the team would go. And the season just felt like an absolute whirlwind. It was so short, straight out of the season into the grand final. But we managed to win it, and it was just the culmination of the craziest journey to put together and build a team and get it all up and going and start in the first season, and to be the team that finished with the premiership at the end of it was nuts. It just felt like it all went so quickly. 2019 is the one that stands out the most, because that was our first home grand final, and we played that at Adelaide Oval. And I remember when we were walking towards the bench before the start of the first quarter. The bottom tier of the stands was all full, but they'd done the thing they do at Adelaide Oval where they'd sort of roped off the top tier of stands, make sure that the bottom tier was full, one, so that, you know, it obviously has a really solid and strong atmosphere, but two, so that you don't have to man bars and the restaurants and, you know, food outlets and stuff upstairs. But it was open access and people just kept coming through the gates. And I remember by quarter time, you didn't really notice it happening during the first quarter of the game because the game was on and you were focusing on what's going on. But there might have been 20 to 25,000 people in the stands at the start of the game. And by quarter time, it was absolutely full to the brim because people just kept pouring through the front gates and they weren't prepared for how many people were going to arrive. And I think the number ended up being somewhere around 53,000. The girls played that game from absolute full house, and it was just incredible to see how much the competition had grown and how popular it had become and what it had done in its first 3 years. So that was awesome. And then, you know, the most recent one in 2022, I've been away for a couple of years. I hadn't been involved in the W program since that 2019 grand final. I've been with the AFL program for a couple of years and then away for a couple of years, and so I got to come back. And the girls had gone really close the year prior. They'd lost the grand final to Brisbane, and they were really hungry to rectify that and to get it right the next year. And that one was a lot of fun as well.
Yeah. So you worked across both male and female. Has there been much difference in the way you've had to change? Have you had to change your coaching style or communication between male and female athletes?
A little bit, but only because the personalities of the players are a bit different. Like there's not a version of me as a strength and conditioning coach to male athletes that's different to the version of me to female athletes. It's more just you try and find what motivates and connects with the athletes in the environment you work the best. So the way that I work with our AFL men and the way that I communicate with them is probably a bit different to what I do with our AFLW players, but it's also different to what I did with our Sandford guys at Woodville West Torrens or the rowers at St. Peter's College when I was out there, or with the golfers that I work with. I work with a handful of amateur and professional golfers as well. And I don't think it's about changing your style based on whether you're working with males or females. I think it's just about connecting with the athletes that you have in front of you. And they're two very different groups, so they just require a different approach in order to connect with them on the level that I want to, and to build a relationship and to build trust and to push them to get the best out of them.
Every sport has challenges and athletes all experience setbacks. What are some of the strategies that you would use with athletes to help them to overcome, you know, times of adversity?
Bring it back to what you can control, you know, whether it's in sport or anything else. Everybody's going to face setbacks of some description. And you're allowed to wallow in it for a little bit. When those sort of things come along, nobody expects you to just be like granite and show no emotion at all. But once you've had your little moment, what you want to do is sort of focus on what can you control, what are the things that you can do. So if we're talking, the most common would be an injury, a long-term injury. What can you do to get yourself back to a place where you're ready to train? Once you're training, set some goals. How are you going to return to be better than you were when you first sustained that injury? And just work towards those. And you know, it's that old saying, eating an elephant one bite at a time. If you look at the whole problem, if you allow yourself to be consumed by whatever adversity or setback, concentrate on too broad a field of view, it can be overwhelming. But if you bring it back into the things that you can control in a single training session, day to day, week to week, and across a training block, you can start to accumulate wins and progress, and it can start to become a really positive process, opposed to being, you know, like I said, an overwhelming negative experience.
So you have a lot of staff working at a high performance club like Adelaide. How do you all collaborate together to make sure you get the most out of each individual athlete?
Yeah, again, I think I've said this a few times today, but I think it's the reason I love it. It's the reason I use it as a bit of a foundation for our program. Everything we do in our performance setting, that the coaches are aware of this approach that we take as well, has to be purposeful. And so that gives us a starting point for all of our conversations. A rehab athletes program, how we train our first year athletes in the gym, what kind of conditioning we're going to do on the field, what kind of recovery we're going to implement after training or away from training or after games. Everything has to have a purpose. And if you can clearly define and understand that purpose, then that's your frame of reference. And then you pull in everybody that's relevant to have their influence on how we address that topic. So if it's rehab, once we know what we're trying to do with an athlete, then it's obviously on our physio and our medical staff who do a fantastic job here with our program to have their input on the initial stages of return to training and rehabilitation. And then we'll pull from our strength and conditioning staff in terms of how do we implement elements within that program that not only return the player to health, but also enhance performance along the way. But if you start with that purpose as the center, everybody can kind of contribute and collaborate around that. I hope that makes sense, but it just it gives a bit of grounding so that everybody doesn't think their individual area is what's most important, or they're not just focusing on what they need to get done. You're ultimately working towards the common goal. And if you can establish what that common goal is early on and get everybody on the same page, then it makes it so much easier to frame the conversation and your workflows and your roles and responsibilities around that.
So looking ahead with this last question here, what do you envision for the future of women's football in the country? Where do you see it going?
It's not going away. All you got to see is head out to the games and just see families and young girls in particular, young kids, but in particular based on what has been available in the past, young girls out there in closed jumpers at Unley Oval, getting Chelsea Randall and Stevie Lee Thompson to sign their jumpers and sign their footies and have a kick and go and sign up at Flagstaff Hill or whatever their local club is. And it's just the ground level growth of the game is amazing. So the standard of play and competition on the field is only going to continue to get better as the pathways that support the league, support the development of the athletes grow and improve, and that's really exciting. In terms of where the game is headed because obviously it's flipped around, it's moved where the schedule sits within the year, and I don't think anybody has a perfect answer to where the game at the elite level is going to sit. Is it going to stay as its own standalone competition? At some point, is it going to operate alongside the men's competition? I don't know, and it's not really up to me to kind of have too much of an opinion on where it sits. We'll just play the games at the times that they give us and do our best to win them. But to be honest, the future direction, it's not going anywhere. It's only getting better. It's really exciting to see the impact it has on young families, young kids, and young girls. Whatever that brings in 5 years or 10 years, I don't know. But it's been amazing to watch it for the first 7 or 8 years, and hopefully by producing exciting on-field results and creating these role models for girls to look up to and stuff, it just keeps growing in whatever direction, from a community impact standpoint or from a game at the elite level standpoint. That is, I'm just excited to watch it as everybody else.
Jordan Sellar, one of your roles, head strength and conditioning coach at the AFLW Adelaide Crows. Thank you so much for your time today on the podcast. You have seriously gone into some detail, and there's going to be a lot of thankful people. There's so many nuggets of information in here that I think someone needs to make sure they've got their pen and paper and just go and write notes, because honestly, that was above and beyond. Thank you so much.
Not a problem, mate. I'm always happy to talk about what we're doing in our program and women's footy more broadly. It's been a lot of fun. It's really exciting, and it's just good to talk to people that are as passionate about it as I am. And so thanks for having me on.
So one last one then. What's next for you in life? What's the next chapter?
I don't know. I'm a father of a couple of young kids these days. So at this stage, looking after 2 little boys is pretty important to me away from work. I'm pretty happy at the moment. I've got a beautiful family, and I love the job that I'm doing here. So hopefully a lot more time here at the Adelaide Footy Club and developing this program and seeing what we can do with it over the next however long they'll have me. I haven't had to do much planning beyond that, to be honest.
Well, it sounds like you're living by the culture, as we discussed that Phil had mentioned previously, and that is family first and then career. So sounds like you got it all
That's
down
right.
pat. No wonder you're happy.
Yeah, well, it's why good people hang around, players and staff and everybody. I feel comfortable with it. I really enjoy myself here. I enjoy our playing group. So yeah, it's good fun. It's a good place to be.
Jordan, thank you so much.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me.
Are you a footballer who wants to maximize your performance to succeed at the top level? My new ebook, Strength and Conditioning 101 for Female Footballers, is now available. For free and instant access, simply head on over to jacobandre.com. Link is in the show notes.